Do you like practical jokes? Have you ever had a practical joke played on you? Did you like it, Lynn? No, right? That's the general feeling, right? Every so often you get one that's genuinely funny and doesn't upset or doesn't offend or doesn't embarrass anyone, right? But most of them aren't like that. Hold on to that feeling about a practical joke here for just a minute today. Protect me, O God, for I take refuge in you. I have said to the Lord, you are my Lord, my good above all other. Now, traditionally, we think this is a psalm written by David telling God's people that he's relying on God for his protection, right? We get a lot of these types of psalms with David either calling out for help or affirming that he lives in God's care, that he delights in being with other of God's people who live out their calling. That when they go other ways, when they follow other gods, it never goes well. And David said, I'm not even going to play that game, right? O Lord, you are my portion and my cup. It is you who uphold my lot. That God is where his trust lies. That because of that, David talks about the blessings he's living in right now. My boundaries enclose a pleasant land. Indeed, I have a goodly heritage. That he's growing day by day as he follows. And he knows, my heart therefore is glad, and my spirit rejoices. My body shall also rest in hope. What hope is he resting in? For you will not abandon me to the grave, nor let the Holy One see the pit. That God is taking care of him while he's alive, and that when he dies, God will continue that love and care. You will show me the path of life. In your presence is fullness of joy, and in your right hand are pleasures forevermore. That our hope and trust is only in God, and it's still in God and always will be in God. In our gospel today we read, when it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors of the house where the disciples had met were locked for fear, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. Now we're back on Easter. We're on that Sunday. We're in John's gospel. Most of the apostles and disciples have locked themselves in the upper room. They're up in that house and they're locked away because they're afraid that the rulers will start rounding up Jesus' other followers. And notice the first thing that Jesus says when he appears in that room is what? Peace be with you. Now why is that? I think it's because for the weeks and months leading up to Holy Week, the apostles were making grandiose claims about what they were going to do, right? Jesus, I'm never going to leave your side. Thomas had said earlier, let's go die with him. James, John, their mother, had asked Jesus that they be placed on his right and his left hand when the kingdom comes. And when Jesus says, that's not mine to give, they say, listen, we can bear whatever you're about to go through, Jesus. Peter had promised to never leave his side. And now he's risen. But notice here, he's not looking to exact revenge. He's not looking to even say, I told you so. He came to finish the work of reconciliation. And Jesus shows them the mark of the nails, and they're so happy to see Jesus. And notice the second thing he says to them, right? Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you. He iterates the peace he's bringing. And then he tells them he's sending them out from here, just like he was sent out by the Father. And the job he gives them through the power of the Spirit was to bring forgiveness of their sins, the wrongs we do to each other. But in all of what happens at that first meeting, Thomas isn't there. And when he returns, he's told by the others, we've seen the Lord. Now I think if we were in Thomas's place, most of us would have been skeptical. We would have thought that someone here is pulling our legs, that it was some kind of elaborate practical joke. And what Thomas says here, unless I see the marks of the nails in his hands and put my fingers in the mark of the nails in my hand at his side, I'll not believe. I've often heard this says this is some kind of mark of doubt. Thomas doubted what was going on. But what did Jesus show the other 11 or the other 10 and all the rest of them in the room that day? The marks in his hands. Thomas wants to see Jesus before he'll believe that this has actually happened. John says a week later the disciples were again in the house, Thomas with them. And although the doors were shut, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." What's the first thing that Jesus says the second time he shows up with the whole group? Peace be with you. And he shows his love for Thomas here. He gives Thomas the chance to touch and to see that it was him, that he was risen, just as he said he would be. And notice that Thomas here doesn't actually reach out and put his hands anywhere. All he can do is cry out, "My Lord and my God." Jesus tells him that the people who've never seen him risen, but one day will believe, will be blessed. John tells us there was a lot more going on that day, and a lot more that Jesus did in their presence in those days that he was here. John says, "But these are written so that you have come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and through believing you may have life in his name." John was doing this so he could fulfill what Christ had called him to do, so they could be adopted into God's family and be reconciled too. We read this evening something Luke says that Peter says just a few weeks later, right? But Peter, standing with the 11, raised his voice and addressed them. That the 11 apostles stood up on the day of Pentecost, having seen the risen Christ just a few days before, having experienced his love, the peace, the reconciliation that Jesus brought with him. And they told the crowds there for the Feast of Pentecost that if they weren't sure what was going on, the locals did. The locals know the story he's about to tell them. That Jesus of Nazareth, a man attested to you by God with deeds of power, wonders, and signs, that God did through him among you, as you yourselves know. This man handed over to you according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God. You crucified and killed by the hands of those outside the law. That everything that happened to Jesus was what God had ordained, done to reconcile us with him. And what they're doing on Pentecost was not some kind of prank. That Peter and company didn't understand all those languages they were speaking. But they could look at the prophets and see the thread, could now understand what God was doing. But that didn't end with his death, because Peter says God raised him up, having freed him from death, because it was impossible for him to be held in its power. That the resurrection signaled the defeat of sin, death, and the grave, that we no longer have to fear them. That when David wrote the words 1,000 years almost before Jesus' birth, Peter and the apostles saw David writing about himself, yes, but that he also saw in those words that we said together, "If you'll not abandon my soul to Hades, or let your Holy One experience corruption, you've made known to me the ways of life. You'll make me full of gladness with your presence." That David was also speaking prophetically, speaking about Jesus and our redemption. And that since his throne would be eternal, the Messiah would be from his family. And that God raised this Jesus up, and all of us here are witnesses. That the apostles were witnesses of the risen Christ, that they could confirm what happened. And years later, one of Peter's disciples writes in his name, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. By his great mercy, he's given us a new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, into an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, unfading, kept in heaven for you. We're being protected by the power of God through faith for salvation ready to be revealed in the last time." Now, this is written to the churches, we think, in what today is modern-day Turkey. That's what's addressed in the first couple of verses there. Jesus is still not returned, and outbreaks of persecution were happening. They want the churches to know that God's love is still with them, that he has not abandoned them. Instead, they're told, "In this you rejoice, even if now for a little while you have to suffer trials, so that the genuineness of your faith, being more precious than gold, though perishable, is tested by fire, that it may be found to result in praise and glory and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. That our perseverance in this life, through its trials and tumults, is here to show God's faithfulness. And it's his faithfulness that we reflect back out to the world. Because our job is not simply to run and hide in difficult times. It's not to be locked in the upper room hoping no one can find us. Because who can appear even when the doors are locked? Jesus can. Because the powers in this world need to see our love shine out for everyone. They need to know that the gospel doesn't change just because they put us under pressure. That God's love doesn't change because of the circumstances. And our reflection of it, that shouldn't change either. They write, although you've not seen him, you love him. And even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and rejoice with an indescribable and glorious joy, for you're receiving the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your souls. That unlike the apostles, unlike Peter, James, John, unlike Thomas, they've not seen the risen Christ. I've not seen the risen Christ. But I felt his love. Sometimes I felt it in other Christians. I felt it here at times doing my job as a priest. I feel it sometimes when I pray. And I have faith that that belief in Jesus and my adoption into his family is not a cosmic prank. That the Jesus who the apostles knew, the one crucified and placed in the tomb, is the same one who appeared to them in the middle of that locked room and granted them peace over peace over peace, and then told them to go and share his love with the world. That is what Peter's been talking about, that we continue to share the love of God with everyone, everywhere, regardless of the circumstances. Today, before we continue, let us ask the risen Christ to help us love our neighbors as ourselves, that we continue to shine out his love, regardless of what's going on in the world around us. Amen.